Kuntsevo, on the western edge of Moscow, March 1953. Snow tightens around the pine trees, and the dacha windows are dark. The kind of dark that usually means the master is thinking, or listening, or waiting for someone to make a mistake. Inside, a heavy rug is bunched where a body has slid, and the air holds the sour trace of last night's tobacco and wine. The guards stand in the corridor with their caps in their hands, staring at the closed door as if it were a loaded weapon. In a state built on fear, the moment Stalin fell, his circle had to decide whether to save the man or save themselves, because one wrong move could make the terror irreversible. A hand lifts toward the handle and stops. Outside, a car engine turns over and dies. How long can a country wait while its ruler lies unheard on the floor? The silence in Joseph Stalin's house is not an absence. It is a presence with weight. The men on duty have been trained to hear it the way a sailor hears a change in wind, a warning before the storm breaks. Stalin has rules for his own protection and, more importantly, for everyone else's. Do not enter unless summoned. Do not wake him. Do not be late. Do not be early. Every instruction has a shadow behind it, the memory of someone who did it wrong and disappeared. Hours earlier, the inner circle had been here. Lavrentiy Beria, Georgy Malenkov, Nikita Khrushchev, Nikolai Bulganin, drinking and joking too loudly because that is what survival looks like in a room where laughter can be audited. They left before dawn, and Stalin remained, irritated, pleased, unreadable. Now the day has dragged on without the usual signal bell. No call, no note. The guards have moved from discomfort to dread, and dread in Stalin's Russia is a kind of mathematics. If the leader is alive and angry, you are guilty. If he is dying and you did nothing, you are guilty. When the door finally yields, it does so like a confession. Stalin is on the floor, half-propped against a low table, one arm stiff, his face slackened into a private astonishment. There is urine soaking into the cloth of his trousers. His breathing is thick and uneven, a harsh rasp that seems too loud for the house. Someone reaches for the telephone and then hesitates. To call doctors is to admit something is wrong. To admit something is wrong is to awaken the machinery that Stalin himself has built, the machinery that eats messengers along with messages. The arena of power is not the Kremlin in this moment. It is this corridor, this rug, this locked door, and the question of who will take responsibility for the first decision in a world where responsibility is usually punished. News of the collapse travels along private lines first, through men who have spent their lives mastering secrecy. Beria and Malenkov arrive at Kuntsevo with the stiff faces of mourners who cannot yet show grief. Khrushchev follows, breath smoking in the cold as he steps out of the car. These men have seen colleagues vanish mid-sentence, have watched entire ministries relabeled and purged, have signed papers that condemned strangers and friends with the same calm hand. Now they are confronted with something no decree can fix. Stalin's body, heavy and fragile, is no longer obeying his will. Later memoirs and testimonies would quarrel over what exactly was said in that first hour. Who insisted he was merely sleeping, who urged action, who tried to control the guards' tongues. What stands firm beneath the argument is the delay itself. The country's leader lies disabled, and the men closest to him move slowly, as if time is a minefield. They call for doctors, and the call exposes the rot under the varnish. In recent weeks, Moscow has been thick with a new terror, the so-called doctor's plot. Kremlin physicians, many of them Jewish, have been arrested, accused of poisoning leaders, accused of plotting with foreign intelligence. Newspapers have hinted at a monstrous conspiracy, and the public has been instructed to look at white coats as if they were uniforms of an enemy. In Stalin's system, Paranoia is not a private illness, it is a policy tool. But now the policy has cornered its own author. The best doctors are in cells, and the remaining physicians are summoned to a bedside where a wrong choice could mean a bullet later. By the time the medical team reaches Kuntsevo, the clock has already taken its share. Stalin's right side is weak. His speech is gone. His blood pressure is dangerously high. The diagnosis is simple enough: stroke, likely hemorrhagic. But nothing about this room is simple. Doctors speak softly and look not only at the patient, but at the faces of Beria, Malenkov, and Khrushchev, trying to read whether honesty will be rewarded or remembered. The first bulletin is crafted like a legal document. Stalin is ill. He is receiving treatment. The words are meant to reassure, but they also serve another purpose: to buy time. The Soviet Union is a colossus that has learned to stand on one man's silhouette. Now that silhouette is crumpled on a dacha carpet, and every institution that has made itself small beneath him must decide how to grow again without tearing itself apart. In the Kremlin, the atmosphere changes before the public knows why. Doors close more quietly. Secretaries stop asking questions. Men in uniforms wait in corridors with the blank patience of those who know that orders may come and may contradict yesterday's. The Presidium, what the old Politburo is now called, begins to gather, not in open session, but in clusters and whispers. Each man measures the others, searching for a new gravity. For Malenkov, this is opportunity and peril. He has been promoted as Stalin's administrative heir, a steady apparatus man, careful with slogans and files. For Beria, it is something sharper, a chance to return openly to dominance after years in which Stalin has kept him close but not secure. Beria is the architect and executor of much of the terror, head of the secret police, overseer of purges, the man whose name in private is spoken like a curse. For Khrushchev, it is a test of instincts. He is less polished than the others, more emotional, with a peasant's memory for insult and a politician's hunger for leverage. He has survived by appearing useful, by laughing at the right times, by acting as if he is never the most dangerous man in the room. While Stalin breathes, while there is even a chance he could wake, no one can act openly against his will. The problem is that Stalin's will has been the only stable law for too long. His absence is not a normal political vacancy. It is a vacuum that threatens to suck the system into violence, because each of these men knows what the others have done, and each knows what a cornered rival might do first. At Kuntsevo, Stalin's bedroom becomes a ward. Curtains are drawn. A lamp throws a yellow pool of light over a face that once seemed carved from stone. The doctors apply the therapies of the day: rest, sedatives, attempts to manage blood pressure, while the watchers count every breath as if it were a vote. At intervals, Stalin vomits dark fluid. His breathing turns to the harsh rhythm of a failing body. The men who built a state around his decisions now stand powerless in the presence of biology. Outside the dacha, a guard paces the corridor and thinks of earlier nights when Stalin called him in to ask questions that were not questions. Why did you look at that man? Why did you hesitate? Why did you speak to your sister in that tone? Under Stalin, the smallest human reflex can be made suspicious. Now the guards must hope that Stalin does not wake, because if he wakes, he will want to know why they entered, and yet if he dies, they will have to swear what they saw, to men who will soon decide what truth is useful. In Moscow, the official illness announcement lands like a stone dropped in a pond. People crowd around newspaper kiosks and bulletin boards. Radios in communal apartments crackle with the same careful phrases. In factories, foremen tell workers to continue as normal, which only confirms that nothing is normal. In ministries, clerks stamp papers with hands that tremble. The Soviet Union is an empire of paper, orders, reports, protocols, and now the paper begins to feel like theater, because the author of the script cannot speak. Some citizens feel real fear, not for Stalin, the man, but for what his death might unleash. Under him, terror has been predictable in its unpredictability. It comes from above, it is justified afterward, and it is rarely challenged. A change at the top could mean relief. It could also mean new purges as successors claw for safety. The average Soviet citizen has learned that history is something that happens to you without asking permission. In the Kremlin, plans are drafted before they are needed. Names are considered for positions that officially remain Stalin's. The question is not simply who will rule, but how. A single successor might be strongest, but it would be an invitation to another Stalin. A collective leadership might prevent that, but collectives in a system built on personal power have their own brutality. If no one dominates, everyone becomes a threat. And always, under every calculation, the spine sentence returns as a private whisper. In a state built on fear, the moment Stalin fell, his circle had to decide whether to save the man or save themselves. Saving Stalin might mean saving the old rules, the old terror, the old certainty. Letting him die might mean a chance to rewrite the rules, or it might mean the same terror, only redistributed among new hands. Stalin lingers for days. Each day is a countdown that no one can stop. Doctors are summoned and dismissed. Bulletins are released in language so cautious it becomes surreal. The leader's condition is serious. He is receiving the necessary treatment. The Soviet public is told to hope. The inner circle hopes for something else: clarity. On the evening of March 5, 1953, the room at Kuntsevo tightens around Stalin's body. The men gathered there, Beria, Malenkov, Khrushchev, Molotov, and others, have the posture of judges and prisoners at once. Stalin's pulse falters. His face changes in small ways that are more terrifying than drama: the slackening of a mouth, the failure of a swallow. A doctor leans close to listen for breath and hears the subtle sound of an ending. When the moment comes, it is strangely ordinary. No thunder, no final speech. The man who had commanded continents dies the way all men die, by the quiet refusal of organs to keep obeying. A doctor announces it. A clock ticks. Someone exhales as if they have been underwater. Then the terror does not vanish. It changes owners. The first decisions after death are about control. Control of information, of symbols, of armed men. Stalin's body is moved to Moscow. His death is announced officially with the solemnity of scripture. In the streets, some cry. Others watch in silence, careful to display the correct emotions. Across the Soviet Union, portraits of Stalin hang in offices and schools, the eyes still stern, the mustache still perfect. The state has to show grief without showing panic. It has to assure the world that the empire continues without admitting how much it depended on one pulse. At the House of Unions in central Moscow, the Hall of Columns becomes a stage for mourning and power. Stalin's body lies in a coffin beneath flowers and red drapery. Guards stand rigid. Party officials move in carefully choreographed lines. The marble columns rise like frozen trees, indifferent to politics. The air smells of wax, flowers beginning to rot, and the heavy perfume of winter coats damp from snow. Here, the conflict is not merely emotional, it is political. Who stands closest to the body? Who is seen by cameras? Who speaks with authority? Malenkov delivers words that sound like inheritance. Beria's face is controlled, almost serene. Khrushchev watches, learns, calculates. Outside, the city becomes a river of people. They come because they are ordered, because they are afraid not to, because they want to see history, because they want to mourn, because they want to prove they are loyal. The lines stretch for miles, past tram stops and factories, past posters that proclaim unity. Soldiers try to direct the crowd, but the crowd has its own physics. People press forward, and the pressure becomes dangerous. In places, bodies are crushed against walls or trampled under boots. The exact number of the dead will remain uncertain, spoken of quietly, if at all. The Soviet state is skilled at manufacturing silence as well as slogans. At Stalin's funeral on March 9th, the leadership presents itself as a collective. On the Lenin Mausoleum in Red Square, beneath gray skies, the men who feared Stalin now claim to carry his legacy together. It is a necessary performance. The world must see continuity. The Soviet people must be given an object to obey. And the men on the mausoleum must see each other, must note who is confident, who is pale, who has lost weight in a week. Even in this public ritual, the spine sentence tightens like a wire. Save the man or save themselves. Stalin is dead, but the decision remains, because now the question is whether to save Stalinism. In the days after the funeral, Moscow's power map is redrawn with surprising speed. Ministries are merged and renamed. The security apparatus, what had been split into separate organs to prevent any one man from controlling it, begins to consolidate again. Beria becomes Minister of Internal Affairs, taking supervision over police and state security under one roof. It is a move that makes everyone else's stomach tighten. If Beria controls the files, he controls the past. If he controls the arrests, he controls the future. Malenkov becomes chairman of the Council of Ministers, effectively the premier. He appears as the formal head of government, the administrative successor. Khrushchev strengthens his position inside the party apparatus, which is less visible than the police, but more enduring. Molotov returns to prominence in foreign affairs, a survivor with a stone face and a long memory. Mikoyan maneuvers, Kaganovich watches, Bulganin counts the military. They speak of collective leadership, a phrase meant to reassure and to constrain. No one man, they imply, will become another Stalin. Yet all of them have been trained by Stalin to expect betrayal as a law of nature. In private, each man asks the same question. Is collective leadership a genuine principle, or merely the first lie told by a new regime? Beria, sensing both danger and opportunity, moves quickly in another direction. The doctor's plot, which had been gathering like a storm cloud under Stalin, is suddenly an embarrassment and a threat. The state needs doctors again. The leadership needs to show that it can correct mistakes without admitting crime. Within weeks, the case is quietly dismantled. The arrested doctors are released, their confessions declared false, the accusations blamed on overzealous investigators. For Jewish citizens who had heard the drumbeat of impending deportations and violence, the reversal is a breath they did not know they were holding. Beria also announces an amnesty, freeing more than 1 million prisoners, mostly those with shorter sentences and non-political convictions, a practical decision to relieve the Gulag system's pressure and, not incidentally, to associate Beria's name with mercy. The gates open in places where gates have rarely opened. Men step into sunlight after years under guard, blinking like moles. Some return to villages that have learned to live without them. Some return to cities where their names have been erased from address books. For a moment, the country feels different. Not free, but loosened, like a belt one notch undone after a long hunger. Yet mercy in Stalin's empire is never pure. Every policy change is also a weapon. Beria's reforms, real enough in effect, are also a bid for legitimacy. He needs allies. He needs a public image that is not only fear. He needs, above all, time. Because the other men have their own countdown running. How long until Beria uses the police to remove them? Inside the Lubyanka, the headquarters of the security services, the atmosphere shifts in a way that even veteran interrogators can feel. Files are pulled and reviewed. Orders are quietly rescinded. Some investigators burn documents, Others hide them because hidden documents are leverage. In corridors where screams have echoed, there is a new sound, cautious conversation. In one cell, a doctor sits on a bunk and hears the locks rattle. He has learned not to hope, because hope can be tortured too. When the door opens and an officer tells him he is being released, he searches the officer's face for the trap. The officer does not smile. Smiles are dangerous here. The doctor steps into the hallway, past men whose eyes follow him with a hunger that is not envy so much as desperate calculation. If he is released, perhaps the world has changed. If he is released, perhaps the old rules are breaking. The release of the doctors ripples outward through Soviet society in a way no official speech can control. It tells people that even Stalin's last campaigns can be reversed. It tells party officials that loyalty is not always safe. It tells prisoners and their families that the state's grip, though still crushing, is not absolute. And that knowledge is combustible. In the labor camps, especially in the vast northern complexes of the Gulag, prisoners absorb the news in fragments. A rumor carried by a guard's careless remark, a scrap of newspaper used to wrap food, a change in the tone of orders. Stalin is dead. An amnesty has been declared. Some prisoners are being released. For those serving long political sentences, men labeled traitors or saboteurs or anti-Soviet, the amnesty is not meant for them. But the very fact of change raises a dangerous thought. If the leadership can change its mind, perhaps it can be forced to. At Norilsk, a frozen industrial hell above the Arctic Circle, prisoners begin to resist. The camp is a world of barbed wire and watchtowers, of mines and smelters, of hunger and exhaustion. Now men refuse to work. They form committees. They demand investigations into abuses. They demand reduced sentences, humane treatment, the right to write letters. It is not a romantic rebellion. It is an argument made by bodies that have nothing left to lose. The guards, uncertain, hesitate. Many have never faced organized resistance. They have faced individual despair. They send messages up the chain. Moscow receives reports that are at once alarming and familiar. Alarm because the Gulag is meant to be a one-way system. People go in and they come out broken or not at all. Familiar because the Soviet leadership has always handled challenges in one of two ways: concession or force, often both. Here again the spine sentence returns, now broadened beyond Stalin's bedside. In a state built on fear, saving the system has always meant saving the men who run it. But what happens when the men need to save themselves from the system they inherited? The international edges of the empire begin to tremble too. In East Germany, the post-war socialist state that exists under Soviet occupation and Soviet design, dissatisfaction has been growing. Work quotas rise. Food is scarce. The ruling party speaks of sacrifice and rebuilding, but many workers hear only commands. Stalin's death removes the aura of permanence. Moscow seems briefly uncertain. In June 1953, on Berlin's Stalinallee, a grand boulevard meant to embody socialist triumph, construction workers walk off the job. Their strike spreads. Crowds gather. The slogans begin with economics and drift toward politics. Calls for lower quotas, then calls for free elections. The scene is not a tidy uprising. It is a city snapping under accumulated strain. In Moscow, the Presidium meets with the kind of tension that makes even seasoned men drink too much tea. If East Germany slips, the Soviet security perimeter in Europe is threatened. If Moscow responds with brutality, it risks proving that nothing has changed after Stalin. If it responds with weakness, it risks encouraging rebellion across the bloc. Beria, who has been urging a softer line in the satellites, partly from calculation, partly from an understanding of instability, argues for concessions. He talks about legitimacy, about not driving allies into revolt, about the costs of repression. To some ears, his arguments sound like pragmatism. To others, they sound like heresy, even betrayal. The Soviet Empire has been held together by tanks and fear as much as by ideology. Concessions can look like cracks. The decision that follows is force. Soviet troops roll into East Berlin. Tanks clatter over cobblestones. Gunfire snaps. The uprising is crushed not only by Soviet power, but by the East German regime's willingness to call on that power. People die in streets under banners that had promised liberation. Arrests follow. The message is clear. Stalin may be gone, but the empire will still shoot. Back in Moscow, the suppression solves one problem and sharpens another. It proves that the Soviet leadership can still command violence. It also proves that the leadership still depends on violence, and it intensifies fear of Beria because Beria's ministry controls much of the apparatus that identifies enemies and executes decisions. Even when the tanks are military, the lists are police. Khrushchev watches Beria carefully. He has seen enough to know that Beria is dangerous in a way that does not require ideology. Beria is dangerous because he understands files, fear, and timing. He is dangerous because he can present himself as a reformer while holding the keys to the prisons. He is dangerous because he knows what everyone has done, including Khrushchev himself. Malenkov, too, begins to see that his formal title is not safety. A premier can be removed with a vote. A police chief can remove a man before the vote happens. Molotov, who has survived Stalin's humiliations and still returns, has his own motive. He distrusts Beria instinctively, as many do, because Beria's power has always been personal, not institutional, and personal power in the Soviet system tends to devour rivals. A conspiracy forms cautiously among men who have learned that conspiracies are lethal even when justified. They need the military, because the police will defend Beria if given time. They need surprise, because Beria's reflexes are quick. They need a legal narrative afterward, because even in a dictatorship, legitimacy is a tool. They turn to Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the hero of the Second World War, a man Stalin feared and sidelined. Zhukov knows what the secret police can do. He has seen officers arrested at midnight, has seen careers erased. He understands the price of inaction. If Beria becomes the new Stalin, the army may become a target again. If Beria falls, the army gains breathing room. On June 26, 1953, in a meeting at the Kremlin, the trap is sprung. The room is familiar: polished table, ashtrays, the smell of paper and tobacco. But the atmosphere is wrong in a way Beria may sense too late. Malenkov presides. Khrushchev sits with a forced calm. Molotov is stone. Beria arrives, confident, perhaps irritated, perhaps already planning his next move. He is still a man who expects others to flinch. Malenkov begins to speak, and the words are not routine. Accusations are read: treason, espionage, abuse of power. For a moment, Beria laughs, a sharp sound, as if the idea of being accused by these men is absurd. He begins to argue, to turn the charge back on them, because that is how Soviet politics has always worked. The accuser becomes the accused. Then the door opens, and Zhukov enters with armed officers. The reveal changes the physics of the room. Beria's face tightens. He reaches toward his pocket, perhaps for papers, perhaps for a weapon. Accounts differ, and details blur under the secrecy that follows. But he is stopped. Soldiers move in, hands on him, pulling him from his chair. Beria shouts, appeals, threatens. Some say he cries out to Malenkov, to Khrushchev, demanding loyalty. The men at the table do not move to help him. They have made their decision. In a state built on fear, the moment Stalin fell, his circle had to decide whether to save the man or save themselves. Now, with Beria in their hands, the logic turns again. To save themselves, They must sacrifice the man who has made fear an art. Beria is taken away, not to a normal prison, but to a guarded bunker, held under military custody so that his own apparatus cannot retrieve him. His deputies are arrested. The security ministries are purged, restructured, brought under tighter collective control. Men who yesterday feared Beria now stamp papers condemning him, using the same language of vigilance and betrayal that Beria himself once wielded. The Soviet public is told that Beria was a traitor, a criminal, an enemy within. It is partly true. Beria was a criminal by any human measure, but the public story is also convenient. It allows the leadership to distance itself from the worst of Stalin's terror by pinning it on one man, as if terror had not been systemic, as if the signatures on execution lists had not belonged to many hands. Beria becomes a scapegoat and a warning. In the months that follow, the Soviet Union breathes in a way it has not breathed in a long time, but the breath is shallow. The leadership continues some reforms, easing the harshest edges, reducing the arbitrary power of the secret police, signaling a desire for socialist legality. They also continue repression where they feel threatened. The camps are not dismantled overnight. The party remains absolute. The press remains a megaphone. The borders remain walls. But the psychological landscape has shifted. People have seen that Stalin can die and the world does not end. They have seen that a campaign like the doctor's plot can be reversed. They have seen that the most feared man after Stalin, Beria, can be arrested by his colleagues. That knowledge cannot be fully erased. It sits in kitchens and tramcars, passed in low voices. The rulers are not gods. They can bleed. In December 1953, Beria is tried in secret and executed. The details are withheld because the leadership wants closure without spectacle. Yet even without spectacle, the event is seismic. A regime that once depended on one man's terror has destroyed the man most closely associated with terror, not out of morality, but out of survival. It is a purge in the old style, justified in new language. Khrushchev emerges stronger from the struggle. He has positioned himself as the defender of party authority against police dominance. Malenkov remains premier for a time, but his power is less secure than his title suggests. The Soviet leadership begins to flirt with an idea that would have been unthinkable under Stalin, that the system might function without mass terror as its engine. It is not a humanitarian awakening so much as an institutional calculation. Terror is costly. It corrodes competence. It makes everyone lie, including to themselves. It creates crises like the doctor's plot, crises that can trap even the leader. And still, the human cost of the transition is written in bodies. In Moscow, families mourn those crushed during Stalin's funeral, deaths never fully acknowledged. In Berlin, workers bury the dead from June's uprising. In the camps, prisoners count the shot and the beaten, and remember that even when the center loosens, the periphery can still be brutal. Across the Soviet Union, people continue to live under surveillance, continue to censor themselves mid-sentence, because habits formed under terror do not evaporate with a death certificate. Yet something has changed that cannot be reversed easily. Stalin's death has broken the spell of inevitability. His successors, even as they cling to power, must now contend with the fact that Stalinism is not simply a set of policies, but a style of rule, and that style has enemies inside the leadership itself. The system has been forced, for the first time in decades, to confront its own mechanisms. In a state built on fear, the moment Stalin fell, his circle had to decide whether to save the man or save themselves, because one wrong move could make the terror irreversible. They chose themselves. They chose survival. They chose, in fragments and contradictions, to prevent any single successor from inheriting Stalin's total authority. That choice did not free the Soviet people. It did not heal the wounds of the purges. It did not resurrect the dead or restore the stolen years. But it did open a narrow passage through which later changes could move: the cautious easing of repression, the eventual denunciation of Stalin's crimes, the slow thaw that would reshape Soviet life and the Cold War world. The death of Stalin is often remembered as the end of an era, but the immediate aftermath is a reminder of how eras actually end. Not with a clean line, not with moral clarity, but with frightened men in a corridor, delaying a phone call, with doctors balancing truth against terror, with crowds crushed beneath the weight of ritual, with tanks rolling to prove that power remains, with a police chief dragged from his chair by soldiers, with a state trying awkwardly to live after the man who taught it to fear. And it still matters because it reveals something enduring about systems built around one person. They look strong until the person falters. Then every hidden compromise, every frightened delay, every locked door becomes the real constitution. The Soviet Union survived Stalin's death, but it survived in a different shape, because the empire learned, briefly, painfully, that even terror has limits, and even the men who command it are not immune to the choices it forces.